Elizabeth and John, two individuals living in one city, are being raised in completely opposite environments. The contrasting atmospheres in which they develop are so far apart that it is almost impossible to think of a situation where their paths might be crossed. The girl is living in a wealthy part of the city. Under the overcast sky, her house and its quiet, seemingly sterile atmosphere are first introduced. Then comes John's neighborhood, in a colorful, demographically diverse part of the city. He spends time with his friends, goes to the bay every day, and is interested in nothing but the simple pleasures of life. On one sunny, scorching day, he and his friend Sluggo decide to start treading towards a morally gray area. Being on the bay, looking over to the wealthy settlement from a distance, they notice a boat docking nearby. The owner, most likely a person with a genuine and naive heart, just leaves it there without even locking it. And naturally, the kids think it is their chance. As adventure calls them, and as their blood boils from curiosity, the two swim away, thinking about the hypothetical wealthy and careless future. At one point, they notice people jumping from a high cliff into the cold water. The large company seems cheerful, and their cries are taken far from the spot by the wind. Both youngsters and adults are enjoying themselves when suddenly someone makes a terrible, dangerous jump. Both John and Sluggo notice some young adults falling down at high speed onto a little girl. Momentarily, as both disappear underwater, John realizes that immediate help is needed. And so, reactively, he flicks away his slippers and jumps into the water. Heroically, he manages to help out the girl, and thankfully, everything ends well. Together, Sluggo and John retrieve the girl on the shore. The adventure, however, is far from being over. The father of the girl, named Frank, takes the boys to his house and offers John a pair of dry clothes. It seems worth noting that Sluggo pays special attention to the PIN code that the man uses to open the door. Once inside, he takes a good look around the breathtaking, wealthy-looking interior and invites John to do the same thing, but the young man has no intention of doing so. While his friend roams around the place, John and Elizabeth's paths cross each other for the first time. As Elizabeth walks down a corridor, she sees the stranger boy in her house, and for a couple of seconds, maintains a curious gaze. It is clear that the young people are dazzled. The connection is abrupt and unquestionable for both. Very soon, the father returns with a fresh pair of clothes and informs Elizabeth about John's heroic deed. He drives the two young men to their neighborhood then, and expresses his gratitude wholeheartedly for the last time. John's friend group will undoubtedly love this story. The next morning, we are better introduced to both Elizabeth's and John's families. Elizabeth's grandma is clearly a bitter, controlling individual, using her power and money to manipulate people and get the better of others. Thinking that her higher social status gives her a right to dominate other people, she speaks to her granddaughter in that fashion as well. Naturally, Elizabeth doesn't appreciate this aspect of her personality at all. This time, while she and her father are visiting the grandma at their summer house, the subject of the conversation is Elizabeth's plans for education. As it turns out, the girl wants to get into the drama school, while the grandma stresses the idea of using their power to get into a more prestigious course. Surprisingly, as it turns out, John is planning to enter the drama school as well. His mother is more than happy to see her kid, planning his future as he wishes to. But the man in police uniform named Patrick, who's sitting by their table as well, points out that John's current street life comes in contrast with the notion of going to a drama school. It is clear that John's mother is much more supportive. Similarly, Elizabeth's parents are supporting his daughter as well. After the subject is closed, he lets the grandma know that he is planning to sell this place. The woman's expression changes immediately. Being against this idea, she brings up Elizabeth's late mother, who used to spend summers in this house. She thinks that by doing this, she will get an upper hand in the argument, but Elizabeth points out the hypocrisy in her behavior. As she emphasizes, the grandma never cared about her mother when she was alive. Naturally, defeated in the battle, the old woman turns to anger and starts screaming. At first, Frank tries to talk her out of her bitterness calmly, but realizing that her rage is beyond control, he decides to just leave. The family drives back from the country, and the boys decide to do something extremely careless. Sitting in a car with his friends, John learns what they are up to and immediately feels bad. Sluggo and the others are intending to rob Elizabeth's house. As it turns out, the young boy has remembered the lock code very well and listened to the conversation in their car about the visit to the country house as well. And so, thinking that the wealthy family is away, the young boys head out to rob the house. It isn't John's first robbery, but it is clear that the boy is drawing back. Reluctant to take a step forward, he is offered to be a mere lookout, but John doesn't want to stain his name on the streets. Deciding to quiet his organismic call, he follows his friend group into the house and, intending to steal nothing, just looks around Elizabeth's room. He observes her paintings, the pictures on her walls, and reads excerpts from her diary. Very soon, the car enters the driveway. Suspecting that something is wrong, the father comes out alone, and at a slow pace, enters the house. The boys end up leaving without being noticed, but they manage to steal nothing but Frank's gun. The next morning, in contrast to his last night's activities, John receives a message from the drama school informing him that he has gotten in. As the days go by, and the young man goes about his life as usual, we learn a little more about his family life. As it turns out, the man in the police form is his mother's boyfriend. This might be the only thing creating boundaries between John and his mother. During his first day at the drama school, John learns to his surprise that he will be learning together with Elizabeth for the time to come. Surprised that they got into the same class, he introduces himself scarcely and listens to her as well. From the way they speak, and from the information that we already know about them, it is highly probable that going to drama school is a form of protest for both. After the class, John comes up to him. Since they already have a history, their first conversation starts out smoothly, but it is soon interrupted by one of their classmates. Clearly, there is a conflict between her and Elizabeth. For some reason, the latter acted sarcastically towards her during the recent introductory class. Once Elizabeth finds a way to get out of this situation, John learns a lot about her from his new friend. The latter doesn't seem very willing to speak about this, but he still tells John about the recent passing of Elizabeth's mother. Clearly, this must be the reason why she is a social, and sometimes even hostile. The new information gives Elizabeth's personality much more depth from John's point of view. On the other hand, the meeting strikes curiosity in the girl as well. In the next scene, the girls ask Frank to invite John to the little one's birthday party, but the man rejects their suggestion immediately. It isn't explicitly expressed, but somehow it feels as if Frank has some prejudgments about John's personality based on his social class as well. That night, John is confronted by his mother's boyfriend at his apartment. The man was once a part of the street culture as well, so he knows what kind of effect a criminally disposed friend group can have on a smart and kind boy like John. Deep down, the young man must know that he is right, but the current situation doesn't let him agree. The next morning, longing to take a further step towards Elizabeth, he tries to express his condolences. The boy clearly doesn't expect that his efforts will inevitably have the opposite effect. Thinking that everybody is gossiping about her in school, she says goodbye in rage. The next morning, after one of their more interesting and active classes, the two somehow manage to clear away the last day's uncomfortable effect. The silence between them finally breaks when Elizabeth asks him to come to her sister's birthday party. All of Frank's work associates will be there, and she wants to have someone she knows around as well. Naturally, John is over the moon. He is more than glad to accept this invitation. In the next scene, he is wrapping a gift for the girl when suddenly, Patrick comes up to him. Immediately, the man gets the idea that John has stolen it from a shop and takes it as his responsibility to check it out. Naturally, the young man is extremely humbled by this gesture. Trying to protect his honor, he stands up for himself and, enraged, reminds Patrick of his dark and criminal past. The man loses control very quickly. Completely overtaken by some evil power, he beats down the young and weak John. Screaming, the young man tries to get away, asking the evil-struck man to calm down, but Patrick still gets him on the floor. It is when he pushes his neck down with his knee that the door of the apartment is smashed in by Sluggo. Pointing Frank's gun at Patrick, he orders him to get out, and thus helps out his friend. He must have heard him scream for help. Affected by this incident, John goes to the birthday party later that evening. Meeting Elizabeth and her sister, gloom brushes off his face very quickly, but soon he catches a glimpse of the girl speaking with another young man. The expressions that she uses, and the very little social distance she maintains, assure John that the two are quite close. He is sitting alone in the living room when one of Frank's friends comes up to him. The man tries to have a genuine conversation with the young man, but still fails to hide his chauvinistic tendencies. It is when the conversation reaches its peak that Elizabeth finds them. Thankfully, she saves the young man from this uncomfortable interaction and takes him to her room. Young people are definitely looking forward to a deeper understanding of one another. They wish to get closer, to make something out of this chance, but the main topic of their conversation still ends up being Elizabeth's headphones in the end. It is when John finally asks her about her mother that she is called from the outside. Unfortunately, their communication ends here, but the two are still glad to have seen each other today. Going about the rest of his day, John finds his mother crying in the living room of their apartment in the next scene. As it turns out, Patrick has broken up with her. The recent incident clearly has everything to do with this news, but the mother knows nothing about it. Thinking that it was all her fault, she accepted support from her son. The next morning, the criminal life sneaks into John's life once more. This time, too, Sluggo plays the main role in dragging him towards danger. Waking him up from sleep, he throws a small red bag at him and explains nothing. Immediately, John checks it out, and his eyes are enlightened by the stolen experiential watches inside. The young man shows no anger or complaint. He simply hides it away and leaves the apartment building as police arrive to find the stolen property. Later that day, John gathers up all his courage and offers Elizabeth to go to a theater together. This is an invitation to a date, of course, but only an indirect one. John emphasizes vigorously that it is just for an upcoming assignment they have to make about the Royal Dramatic Theatre. Naturally, Elizabeth reads between the lines, though. She agrees. When the time comes to go, however, a surprising miscommunication takes place between Elizabeth and her father. As it turns out, Frank needs to go to work tonight too, and somebody has to stay with the little one. On the basis of this matter, an uncomfortable, vigorous argument ensues, in which Frank even screams at his daughter. In the end, he forbids her to leave the house tonight and go to work. Disappointed in how her day progressed, Elizabeth tries to call John, but the boy's battery is empty, so he cannot answer. In the next scene, the sun is already set when John finally manages to take the call. Here, while his friends make fun of him in the car, John is invited to come by Elizabeth's house. The young man is surprised to hear this offer. He didn't expect the day to turn around so sharply. It is when her sister finally goes to sleep that Elizabeth hears the engine noise in her driveway. Going down to meet John, she sees all the other ones in the car and has a small conversation with Sluggo. The latter invites her to go on a ride for a little while. John objects to this immediately, but Elizabeth agrees. And so, the girl leaves her sister sleeping in her bed and hits the streets with the boys. Spending time with the people from John's neighborhood, she experiences a kind of excitement she never felt before. This is all very new and pleasant for her. Here, all the artificial boundaries between classes are shattered, and meaningful, simple connections are made. At one point, one of John's friends asks Elizabeth to participate in an acting exercise. He wants to make a scene in which they break up with one another. All expect Elizabeth to act comically bad, but the real emotion she manages to elicit in herself forces the company to grant her a standing ovation. It is clear, all approve of her. Later that night, Elizabeth and John get back to her house together. Standing in the driveway, John prepares to say goodbye and go back. But suddenly Elizabeth offers to swim together. Frank isn't coming home anytime soon, so they can spend some more time together. And so, the time of pleasant but strong excitement comes to the young man. Watching her get undressed and swim inside, he follows her down. The two begin swimming around one another, conversing about their love lives, when suddenly Elizabeth hears the voice of her father coming from upstairs. Reactively, John dives down, and he manages to stay put in this manner, while Frank apologizes to his daughter for raising his voice earlier that evening. Elizabeth is glad to hear her father apologize, but she does everything in her power to make the conversation as short as possible. She gets out of the pool, then leans down towards John and gives him a goodnight kiss. Here, a new kind of irresistible energy unlocks in the young boy's brain. Feeling awakened from some deep and meaningless sleep, he runs back home. The next morning, he chooses his outfit for an upcoming party. Since Elizabeth is going to be there, he is especially eager to make him presentable. And so, this eagerness is the reason why he chooses to wear one of the stolen watch. Without thinking much about it, he picks the one that best suits the color of his shirt and goes out. The party was colorful that night. Neon lights, music, and the woods in the moonless night create a wonderful atmosphere. Here, the entire friend group learns about the new relationship between John and Elizabeth. The woods at night are a dangerous place, however. Trying to get back home after the party, a black BMW approaches them from behind. The youngsters don't get scared immediately. Giving the two men in the car the benefit of the doubt, Elizabeth asks them if they could give them a ride towards a main road. But very soon, it becomes obvious that the men in the car have no peaceful intentions. Moving at a slow, predatory pace, one of them approaches Elizabeth as John stands by, petrified. Thankfully, the men only want to rob them. Quickly, Elizabeth gets free of all the jewelry on her and hands it away, as does John. But the young man has one more accessory on him that he is not ready to part with yet. Unfortunately, however, this is exactly the piece of property that robbers get especially interested in. Naturally, it is the watch that has been stolen by Sluggo. John acts reluctant to give it out. Saying that it is fake, he moves aside when the men reach for the watch. This makes them angry, of course. Trying to elicit fear in the stubborn boy, one of the men hits Elizabeth in the face. The girl ends up laying on the ground, and John finally comes to his senses. It is when he finally parts with the watch. When the men leave, and Elizabeth walks away from him at a high pace, naturally, she has no intention to speak with him anymore. The fact that they get mugged isn't the issue. It is the immaturity that John showed that angers her so much. As minutes go by, Elizabeth is taken home by Frank. It is understandably why the man wants this relationship to end immediately. Getting back home, Elizabeth tries to fight back, but Frank underlines some facts that help him win the argument. Boys like John are trouble magnets. It hasn't been long since he entered their lives, and they have already gotten mugged twice. As time goes by, John becomes gloomier than ever, so naturally, his mother notices him wandering through dark times. Compared to Frank, she supports her son and urges him to fight for his relationship. If he believes that Elizabeth loves him too, he must try to do his best. The young man has no other option but to follow this advice. One night, in the pouring rain, he arrives in front of Elizabeth's window and calls her name loudly. From the very beginning, it is evident in his expressions that he is ready to change for this relationship. Once let inside, he apologizes wholeheartedly. Standing in her room, he uses the opportunity he is given and explains why he argued back. Taking her hand in his, he expresses his love and adds that he cannot live without her. His words are genuine, but the young man fails to recognize the importance of honesty in this moment. Instead of telling the whole truth, he lies, saying that the watch was borrowed from somebody. Still, Elizabeth accepts his apology. Seeing that the young man feels the same towards her, she strips him of his wet clothes and gets free from hers too. The next day, Elizabeth and John finally start acting like a couple in drama school. As time flies, memories are made that will follow them forever. This portion of their lives is free from obstacles and troubles, and filled with nothing but love and excitement for the future. One night, however, Sluggo was suddenly met with some higher-ranking gang members. They order him to enter their car, and even though it is scary, the young man feels forced to follow that order. The next morning, John is in drama school when the past finally catches up to him. Sluggo calls him and demands the watches back. He needs them in his hands as soon as humanly possible. John is petrified by fear. Not knowing what to do, he just says that he will be with him shortly. Sluggo appears to be beaten in the next scene. Naturally, after hearing the truth about the stolen watch, he freaks out. Angered beyond his consciousness, he tells John that the watch is worth $200K and that it is now his responsibility to do something about it. If Sluggo doesn't pay the gang back tomorrow, he will surely be murdered, and it is going to be in John's hands. The latter is in big trouble. Struck by the magnitude of trouble he is in, his ability to think straight becomes damaged, and so, this is the state in which he finds his flawed solution. To accumulate the money he lost, he steals an expensive piece of sound equipment from the drama school that night and returns home to retrieve the red bag full of other watches as well. Suddenly, however, he encounters a terribly dangerous situation in the living room. Patrick is sitting on the sofa, and the red bag is in front of him. An impossible dilemma appears in front of the young man. Patrick demands that he apologize for what happened between them and threatens to call the cops if he doesn't do so. The decision is too difficult to make for the boy. Not knowing how to get out of this situation, he tries to snatch the bag and run, but finds himself strangled by Patrick. Thankfully, the mother intervenes, and John ends up escaping the apartment with the bag in his hands. Naturally, after grabbing John aggressively, Patrick is kicked out of the apartment. In the next scene, the boys are with gang members. As it turns out, everything is fine. They won't see any trouble from them anymore. The next morning, however, everyone in school learns about the robbery that happened last night. The information spreads quickly that the thugs came down from the roof. Elizabeth's heart begins to race after hearing this information. Knowing that John knew about the secret entrance from the roof, a suspicion appears in her mind. Wishing to get free from this suspicion, she calls him, but gets something worse in return. John breaks up with her without any concrete explanation. It's hard to imagine how the situation could become even worse for the girl. But that afternoon, Frank shows her something he should have shown her before. It is a video of the boys trying to rob their house. Seeing John among the company, Elizabeth's heart is frozen. Soon, the fact that John burglarized the school becomes known, so the young man and his friends flee the city. The boys fail to flee the past, however. As criminal life maintains its grip on Sluggo's existence, he is shot from behind. The poor John hears the commotion from nearby. Thinking that the toughest part of his life is over, he is confronted with a traumatic experience. His best friend leaves this world before his eyes. Thoughts of vengeance start appearing in his mind, and in this vulnerable state, he fails to oppose them. Completely overtaken by the thirst for blood, he acquires a gun from his reasonable friend named Kiba in the next scene, and despite his opposition, he goes back to the city to avenge Sluggo. Seeking ways to stop him, Kiba calls Elizabeth, meets up with her, and rides away to catch up with John. Despite their efforts, however, they are late. Walking up to the young man who murdered Sluggo, John points the gun at him, takes out his phone, and calls 911. When Elizabeth and Kiba arrive, they find police cars everywhere. But to their relief, that shot hasn't been fired and nobody is hurt. Realizing that in the darkest of moments, light still prevailed in John's heart, Elizabeth gets on Kiba's scooter quickly and catches up with the police van. She does everything to be put inside as well, and once shackled beside her love, she kisses him firmly. This time, the dark is beaten for good.